Okay, welcome to another episode of the Supply UnChained podcast. I'm Raza, your host. Today, I am honored to invite and host Mr. Jake Lanning and Henry Camp on this latest episode of the podcast. Gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Doing very well. Thanks very much for having me, Ali.
Life good for me.
Excellent. So, before we get into it, maybe Henry and Jake, could you potentially give us a quick background on who you guys are? I know we met back in Kentucky 6, 7 years ago, just discussing ideas, but it would be great for the audience to learn about some of the work that you guys do, which I think is really leading edge, especially in the industrial space. Maybe over to you, Henry, and then over to Jake.
Sure. I'm glad to give a little intro. The major thing we're doing right now is putting an emphasis into managing supply chains instead of teaching people how to manage supply chains. So we literally, you outsource your supply chain to us, and we get adjacent to a manufacturing plant and feed raw materials in at the last second, and then take finished goods back and then deliver to customers at the same time. And what we're using, the kind of background behind all this and my other businesses and so forth, is a technology using theory of constraint dynamic buffer management, which basically means not running out while enhancing flow so that there's less stagnant inventory. And that you can get into that if you're interested, but that dynamic buffer management, we call it, where we're keeping an adjustment. So there's always some more inventory in the middle. You've got demand fluctuating on the one side, you got supply fluctuating on the other. And ERP systems tend to work on the demand side to do a forecast, but they don't do much anything on the supply side. So it's just, oh, hope it's okay. So anyway, that's what we're trying to resolve. I'll kick it over to you, Jake.
Yeah, and I'm working here at Shipper Solutions, actually my second stint, but now I'm here to bring actually supply stream, the solution that Henry just described, out to the market. So doing a bit of pioneering, talking to manufacturers, retailers, distributors, about how they're solving today, what they're doing, what systems they're using, how their people are fighting, how those systems are causing either solutions, actual delivering the thing they're trying to solve, or actually creating more conflict within their organization. And just it's been a very revealing process over the last about 11 months that I've been doing this, and looking forward to talking about it in any detail you like.
Yeah, to that point, Jake and Henry, I guess the big question, and Henry already pointed this out, is why has there not been that much work being done on the supply side for technology? Because obviously we've had demand-centric MRP, we've had all sorts of ERP systems. Why has this space been neglected? And a lot of what I'm seeing right now is the industry is focused on more supply chain mapping exercises. So like, where does lithium come from, right? Versus actually looking at how does it flow and how do you get that inventory right? So could you talk to me about that, maybe Jake? And I know this is tied to your last stint where you were doing those pods a couple years back and going all over the food chain.
Yeah, so I think the kind of one-liner that I have found myself to be at, and I haven't, nobody's proved me wrong quite yet, is that I've found that supply chain is kind of TOC. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient for an organization. So especially within a manufacturing company, what I found is they really need to be great at two things. That is making great product at the cheapest possible price and selling that product. The getting the materials in order to make the thing, it's necessary, but they don't have to be great at it in order to make great products. And I found that instead of trying to be excellent, they kind of throw bodies at the problem, and the place are very legacy. Maybe they have systems, but it's not a place where they're investing because they know they need the cheapest possible quality product sold into the market at the highest price. And everybody's chasing revenue. So looking at the inventory supply management is it's really an afterthought. I'm not saying it's not have 18 items on your priority list. This is probably number 17. And I've noticed more in certainly like the CPG space and retailers, it's more obvious of a problem when you're selling through distribution and the job isn't done until the end customer buys, right? So visibility, there's a lot of solutions that are creating visibility into those shelves, but no mechanism that actually ensures that the right product is in the right place at the right time. And back to Henry's point, instead of teaching people how to do this, we want to offer it as a full service. And that I've had what I'm hearing a lot from folks is one, they just don't have the competency to know where to start. And we don't want to have to teach someone that the theory of constraints way is a good way or a better way than what they're doing. We just want to show them the results by doing it for them. And there's been a lot of just kind of genuine interest in that proposition so far, which has been fun.
Yeah, that makes sense. Henry, did you have your 2 cents on this?
No, I love listening to Jake talk about it. That was he said it very well. But I think that the crystal ball, some witch lady rubbing the crystal ball to tell you what's going to be what you're going to need and when you're going to need it is really, if it were possible. I mean, it seems ridiculous the way I just expressed it, but that's what we try to do electronically. There are lots of flies in the ointment and makes it very, very difficult to do that. And sometimes those flies arrive just randomly. That I've had a series of increasing demand signals, actual consumption signals. And so if I'm going to forecast, I would have to, is this a trend? Yes or no? When you have enough different items that you manage, there will be indications of trends that are not trends. And so it'll swing up a little bit for a while and then typically collapses right back down again. And when that happens, forecasting systems work very, very poorly. Most of the time, they work pretty well. The place where I really grade them, though, is how much inventory does it require not to run out? And my experience is that using these kinds of systems uses about twice as much inventory as the system that we use. And our system is so simple that it's not really, I think a lot of people have learned to embrace complexity and think that sophistication is wonderful. 100 years ago, we kind of got onto this sophistication is good. It's good to be sophisticated, isn't it? But 2,000 years ago, sophistication was terrible. It was adulteration. And we've lost that meaning in the term. But so now we've automated through electronic solutions, computer software, et cetera. We've automated the adulteration, and it just doesn't work that well. Now that's a hard sell because everybody's going one way. You want to go, you're in a little boat going the opposite direction. It's much easier just to say, just let me do it for you. And then it works and they like, oh, this is great. Than it is to try to have the intellectual debate. So, and I think Jake's been doing a really good job of making that just kind of common parlance.
Yeah, to your point, Henry, I think I sent an email this morning regarding that very topic, right? Which is most people have requirements, but they don't know certain things are already possible, right? Such as your service today. So, in your own words, what do you guys think make your service possible today, right? Versus maybe 6 or 7 years ago? Because to your point, everybody's still chasing that demand forecast. There's a lot of confusion around bottlenecks now than ever before, right? Everybody's using the word bottleneck in every workflow you can think of, right? So what is it like? I guess define what you think a bottleneck is probably beyond what you guys do now. But why is what you do today possible? And how can more people, to your point, just try it out and see the benefits rather than actually have to learn all of these, operational methodologies before they can get the benefits? Because you're really looking for the outcomes, right? Not the knowledge is to get the outcomes.
Hmm.
Yeah, exactly right. I'll take a stab at this, and then we'll let Henry clean up any mess that I make. What I'll start by saying is it's been possible and it's been done. Henry's had another company that been doing this really since early. But what makes this the right moment for us is that we have the 3PL infrastructure. We have folks and 3PL is super common, right? A manufacturer says, I need more space than I have. Will you hold my product and my customers when I tell you to? That is already built in. It's an outsourced service, right? But what we also have is Elucidate, the software that Henry mentioned. And those two capabilities combined allow us to deliver the solution as a whole now. So we can see our 3PL customers and we can see the bottlenecks that they create in themselves. We can see when, the purchasing person, we can make some inferences, right? The purchasing person might have quite a grasp on what they're doing or their forecast. They said 4 orders were going to show up last week, but only 2 did. Or they said we needed to ship out 7 of these pallets, and here's the amount of inventory you all have, when in fact, they don't even know the amount of inventory that we have of theirs. And so it comes in different ways. I've noticed visibility. People don't know what they have. And if they do know what they have, they don't know where it is. And so when you're trying to make effective decisions about what to do with your inventory and you don't have the basics done, that creates a real challenge. So we have world-class operations, the 99.9% accuracy, greater than 99.9% on time and full, through distribution. That our distribution business, that's managed by Elucidate, how we actually fulfill products to our customers, and then on the 3PL side as well. So now we're able to marry those two solutions. If I was going to put this into terms, it's really just a decision that we made. We want to create more value for our customers. We look around, we see the pain that these purchasing teams are going through, that the logistics teams are having to fight because they don't have what they need when they need it, and can solve that problem. And it's almost altruistic kind of endeavor, because we're really solving people's problems at the end of the day. And it cascades from the purchasing team to the sales team, who doesn't have, sales teams aren't quoting as aggressively as they want to, because they're not confident in the lead times that their production team is putting out, but their production team isn't confident in their schedule because the supply chain team hasn't provided them with the right amount of products, or they have to change over their line 10%, 15% of the time. All those things add up into interdepartmental chaos and interdepartmental conflict. Things can run smoothly, but that's why firefighting is another buzzword, right? So where's the bottleneck? How often are you firefighting? And I feel like Supply Stream and Shippers is prepared to deliver that solution now, because we have decades of experience by fixing those problems for our distribution customers who happen to be manufacturers. And we have built a lot of trust and competency in managing other people's inventories for them. And this solution, again, marries those two very well.
Yeah, on that note, Jake and Henry, maybe walk me through a couple examples, right? So the two pulses I'm seeing in the market is either your capacity constraint, think of like data centers where there's 3 to 5x demand, right? And they just can't keep up. So how do you get your supplier base to approach that problem? And the other thing I obviously see is budget constraints, right? Especially in city governments, et cetera, which is they want to do it more with less. So the solution that you have for both of those, maybe just walk me through like a couple of ways you can help, because I think that's where most of the scalable problems are right now.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at this one. So if you're a manufacturer making something, the question is how many raw materials go in to the thing that you're making, and what's the likelihood of having each raw material on hand. So let's say you're good and you're 99% chance of having a raw material on hand. I just popped it up on my phone, but I just said, well, if you have 300 raw materials, I don't know if y'all can see that or not, but that's the likelihood of having all 300. It's not quite 5%. So this is why what Jake said before is so meaningful, right? The sales group is really, I don't know when you're going to be able to make this for me. And once I have a customer and brought that customer in, I need to go back and smooth things out when we don't deliver on time, which we, the funny story Ellie Goldratt told me a long time ago was about the people that made the core part of a refinery. And it was about a $60 million part going in a $60 billion or $6 billion refinery. I don't know how much refineries cost, but it's way up in the B's. So this core, which reacted the oil and split the molecules out into smaller molecules that would turn into a refined product. He asked them, how many times are you on time? And they went into a cluster and they murmured back and forth. And he was asking about the whole industry. And they came back after 5 minutes of discussion and said, we've never been on time with the delivery of one of these core reactor units, but we were had once delivered on time. So it never delivered on time. And Goldrat's point was that, well, uh, what's how much money did the delays of you delivering that core element of the entire refinery, what did that cost? And they said, well, we don't know. And he pointed out, well, how many barrels of oil go through the refinery because you defined the refinery to be able to handle that many barrels of oils, and the price of oil. So that a 2-year delay on producing this refinery, you can multiply these two numbers together, and that gives this astronomical number. That's the cost. And his point was, well, if you could deliver on time this one element, that's the element that slows up the refinery. Mercy. Uh, it doesn't matter whether you charge $160 million instead of $60 million for this unit. That's worth it because that's how much impact or damage there's done. And so back to your question, what Shippers has a little tagline. It's on all of our trucks and on our letterhead and things like that. We have not anymore, but it would be on there. But on the email signature and so forth that says solving problems, making heroes. And it's not us being the heroes.
I guess the question I have is what you're doing today. Walk me through a couple of examples, right? So most of the environments that I see today are twofold. One is their capacity constraints. Think of data centers, like they have 3 to 5x demand. How do you keep up, right? And then the others are budget constraint, which is, hey, we really want to try technology or something that can help us, but we just don't have the budgets to do so. So how can you help us with things like stock out rates or improving on the bottom line, right? So walk me through a couple examples there, maybe Jake or Henry.
Go
So
ahead,
I'll
Henry.
take a stab at this one. Some of the examples that I've seen they're just that the process interruption costs an enormous amount of money. So from the budget side, the second part of it, from that side, operations come to a standstill because of the lack of even one raw material. And so, I calculated what if you had 99% chance of having each one of 300 items, it's less than 5% chance of having them all. So, and if you go to 1,000 items, which might be in a lawnmower, then it's even worse. So that's kind of the situation that we're trying to rescue. And this sort of one of our taglines is, solving problems, making heroes. And we're trying to make the customer be the hero, our clients be the hero. And there's only so much time and money that you can put to a problem. So if you're managing manually, you're a smaller company and you don't have an ERP system, then you just do your best, right? There's only so many orders you can place. And if you're using ERP and you have to review the ERP's suggestions, there are only so many reviews that you can make. So how do you have the time to do the work? And is your company going to hire more purchasing agents? They already have 10. Are they going to go to 50? The answer is no. They want to go from 10 down to 9 or 8 or something like that. So this is the difficulty that the poor people there do. How do you make less work, or how do you accomplish all the work? Well, I have an inexpensive item that I just buy a year's worth at a time. That way I only have to deal with that item once a year. It's not that much money. Nobody cares. Nobody came and complained to me that I had a year's worth of inventory. With our solution, we look at every single item individually, and the system does all the work. It's a black box. No work at all on anybody to do this work. And the flow enhances quite a bit on almost every item. The inventory drops down. Obviously, the ones you're totally out of, you wish you had more inventory, and we have more of those inventory of those items. But it's not in aggregate. It's typically, as I said before, about half as much inventory as before. Jake, add on to that for us.
Yeah, I mean, some other examples that I'm dealing with, some of our prospects I'm working with, we've got a manufacturer of a very complex system that goes into beds and things like that. And they have to change their production schedule about 10% of the time. They know a week in advance what it's going to be, and they change it about 10% within the next week, gets moved. And about 50% of the reasons that they change that 10% is related to risk. And so when it doesn't always happen, right? But when the 10% that gets moved is from the most important customer or the hottest order, that's where salespeople coming in to save customers and the confidence in the operation drops, right? Costs go up because orders are getting expedited. Another thing I found and kind of doing interviews of manufacturers around our city is that nobody is tracking the amount of money they're spending on expediting. And when I ask, it makes them uncomfortable to acknowledge that. I know I hear people expediting daily, but I don't know how much that's costing us. It just kind of goes into the freight line on the P&L, right? But those expedites are symptoms of chaos within raw material planning and inventory management. And so those are some examples that folks bring up and that are very obvious that they want solved. So yeah.
Yeah, to your point, right? This is a problem everybody in the U.S., probably globally, is facing. So, just in your backyard in Kentucky, like, what is the pulse out there? A lot of distributors, obviously, manufacturers in that ecosystem. So, how are they getting around their problems? And to your point, how do you make it easy for your customer to adopt your system, right? How do you get them to be the hero in a pretty simple way, right? By using your system or your service.
Yeah, well, we kind of have this the automotive corridor here between Indianapolis, Cincinnati, and down into Bardstown, the south of Louisville. A lot of automotive sub tiers feeding into Ford locally, feeding into Toyota, feeding into Honda and FCA up in Indiana, and they have created this micro environment of short replenishment times, of bringing their suppliers to them, onshoring as much as possible, right? So everything that gets built here moves through those sub tiers very quickly. And so they've regionalized their supply chain, which has drastically reduced lead times instead of waiting on containers for final parts coming overseas, right? So that's an obvious thing that they're doing to resolve this problem, at least in its one of the main issues. But reducing lead times is a very big part of the TOC distribution solution. And so from there, how we help make this obvious for them, how we make it a simple solution is really there's not a whole lot of IT setup, right? A lot of this is driven by at least the improvements at the inventory levels are driven by Elucidate, but the connections required to into their system to manage those, and it's not an integration. It's not at that level, but really the discipline comes from our actual 3PL infrastructure that we've built, greater than 99.9% inventory accuracy. That is what makes it possible for us to move, because we know where it is, we know how much we have, and we know where the orders that are coming in and the orders that are going out. If we didn't have that, the software solution would not be nearly as impactful. And it's actually how we came to decide that this solution instead of just here's the software, because when they don't solve the foundational inventory management problems, they don't get the full benefit that they could. And so that's why this is now a service instead of just software. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, material as a service is something I've been seeing over the years people pick up on. And to your point, right? Just giving the software is not enough. I mean, yeah, the software will tell you where the problem is and how much to have, but if you can't get the part, then what's the point of it, right? And that's been sort of the struggles of a lot of the software vendors in the space, which is like, hey, like, like, yeah, you're out of XYZ, but like, okay, we know that. I mean, we've been out of that for 3.5 years. So what are you going to do about it? Right. So maybe this is a good segue to Henry. Right. So speak to me more about like this focus on the 3PL infrastructure. I think very few groups, at least in the US, are looking at this now. I know out of Europe, they were looking at this 6 or 7 years back to say, hey, how do we bring the SAP system together with our massive manufacturing operations out of the German industrial base, right? So speak to me on that, and maybe it's a good segue into what you do with aerospace parts.
Sure. So yeah, the idea is that we're trying to integrate a system that just works. That's what we're trying to do. And this is kind of a long-term thing. I mean, if you think about things that we outsource, for example, ADP does payroll for you. So, if once they'll do the payroll and keep track of all that stuff, if you can outsource that, they can do it less expensively than you can do it and better than you can do it. Well, it's a no brainer. And this has been a long term, it's been 40, 50 years. Companies have been doing this. This is one of those areas that people feel like it, that my feeling is that this is so critical, it's so mission critical that I have to do it myself. And so what Jake's job is to try to get across to people that we had a hard we got here through a hard road, and we got really good at this. And he talked about 30, 35 years ago, we had the inventory accuracy issue, and we're trying to wrestle with that. And so, we got through that and came out the other side. And then after that, discovered this kind of flow of inventory through the system. So, and as we got better and better at it, that was where we realized that this was a long road. I mean, if you want to spend and after if you want to ask me about how to do it, I can tell you how to do it. And in 15 or 25 years, you can probably do it 10 years quicker than I was able to. On the other hand, maybe you need to focus on some of those important things that Jake mentioned before, like selling your product or making it competitive. So those are the kind of things that we're thinking that this is how we can help. Uh, Everybody wants to do their part, wants to make some sort of difference. This is how we're trying to do that. Um, but the complex supply chains, what's happened with them is for the last 40 years or so, we've outsourced work to low cost labor sites where you could buy something, the pieces and parts, the subcomponents or the whole thing from someone else who can make it better. We stopped making our own cars to a great extent here in the United States. We started importing dies, you know, and so we started bringing those in, and they were cost effective. We're like, wow, it's a nice little car. It's not a big Ford or a big Chevrolet, but boy, it uses a lot less fuel, and I can kind of race around town, and it's kind of good. And so we have those types of changes. It's happened through all supply chains. Every single thing that you could buy from someplace else. This is what Boeing is struggling with right now. 3 million parts in a plane. Well, take 99% to the 3 millionth power and figure out what the likelihood of having all the parts is. It goes to zero. There's no chance. So you hold sub-assemblies, lots of inventory, and the inventory is the solution to availability. That's what people typically say, and I have to do a trade-off. And so I was carrying cost of inventory, but that could be 10 times less than the cost of a shortage. So it's worth it to carry the inventory. This is not bad thinking, it's brilliant thinking. Now the question is, can we do both? Can we carry less inventory and have an order of magnitude better availability? And that's what we've realized how to do, and what we're trying to share with other people. And then if they want to learn how to do it, we'll teach them. There's no big deal. But first we like to do it so that they can see how to do it. It's not a secret, but hardly any people know it. So that's what we're trying to show the value of it, demonstrate that value.
That's pretty incredible. To your point, right? Coming back to what is this? I guess the hesitancy is that everybody manages inventory, so how hard could it be? So, but then obviously there's companies that like you've gone through the battles and the scars, learning it on your own dime of inventory. So why is it hard to move people towards like a vendor managed inventory methodology to say, hey, look, like we've outsourced everything else. What do you think it is with
Yeah.
organizations? Maybe Jake, you can answer this as well, where they feel that, hey, how hard can it be? It's inventory. I can do min max and I can stock it. Move on, right? Because I think I've seen this across 15 to 20 years. Funny you mentioned Datsuns. My dad had Datsun probably back in the 60s and 70s, so I know what you mean. And same with oil and
Mm.
gas, right? Which you mentioned a little bit earlier. Yeah, I mean, we try to communicate, hey, like if we can flow the well faster by getting stuff done faster, that means more oil output for you, similar to your refinery example, right? But what do you think it is about inventory that people just have this attitude of, yeah, I got it, don't worry about it, we'll figure it out, how hard can it be?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at this
You want to
to
take it, Jake?
start it. Yeah.
Yeah.
My this might not be the I don't know the most revealing answer, but to me, it's very human. And it's that again, um, the this isn't it's on their priority list, but it's number 17 of 18. Um, and the person that brings it up as the priority is the person who benefits from the problem continuing to being the source of all knowledge. They know how to manage it, and they need Tina or they need Daryl. Um, and that person has a lot of, I guess, job security, in that they know where the bones are buried. They know how to solve the problems, and they have a lot of confidence that, in fact, they are doing a great job resolving a lot of these issues before they come up, um, by expediting products, or holding 4 times as much inventory because they just don't want to deal with that item again for another year, right? I'll order a year's worth. It's too much, but we'll just get over there. And that's what I've seen. It's just a very human function of not the right priority, and the people that are solving the problem are doing it in such a way that the inertia it has been that way for several decades, and it could remain decades unless something else changes.
So Henry, thanks, Jake, and to add to that, Henry, do you think it's a trust issue? Is it a knowledge issue? Is it a security issue? Is it all three? Because as Jake mentioned, I remember when I used to work in oil field, there was this guy with 40 years of experience. I could go all over the port and I wouldn't be able to find the part in two days, but he'd pick up the phone and 30 minutes later, it's on your shelf. And you're like, well, why didn't you do that before? But I mean, we just understood that that was the bottleneck, right? For the most part, to get anything done, you had to respect that bottleneck. But your thoughts on this? I mean, how do you get people to say, hey, maybe inventory is something you can outsource to someone else who sort of had the battle scars, can manage it to 99.99% reliability versus, hey, like we're just going to continue running things on spreadsheets and hope the guy who's been here for 30 years is going to be here for 35.
Yeah, it's such a great thing. I had an old cartoon that we would send out as a marketing thing, and it showed the picture of the guy who knew where everything was. To your point, in the hospital with his cast on his leg in traction, and the people were rushing into the hospital room not to see how he was, but to find out where the parts were. Right, where do I get this stuff? And so they were wrestling with that. So it's a huge problem. And so the world of replenishment is the expediting world. That's what's apparent. That's what we see, and that's what we value. Now the problem is that it shouldn't be necessary in the first place. The inventory should already be there, and expediting should be if it's instead of being this much of the job, it should be this much of the job, and all this much of the job over here should be worked on sourcing. How do I buy it for less? How do I get it at a more reliable, quicker replenishment time, or a more reliable supplier, or higher quality. Those are the things that are important that we should be doing. We're not doing those. That the expediting has come way out to use maybe all of the available time of the people that the company is willing to deploy to do that. And so what we do is we look around for where are these problems. You asked me this before and I didn't answer about a new business that I'm starting in the commercial jet aviation engine parts field.
So
Yeah, do thanks.
So yeah, to your point, uh, on the topic of inventory, right, that we've been discussing, why isn't it just pretty obvious to outsource these sorts of things, right? And I think we'd start speaking about your jet business, and keep in mind with all the accounting leading a lot of these industrial corporations. I mean, it shouldn't be music to their ears to say, hey, like you keep all the inventory on your balance sheet and your books, and not have it on my books. I mean, I've seen more and more corporations go the way of like 3PL and hey, you keep the inventory and solve it and fix it. But to that point, right, wouldn't more customers be interested in a solution like what you have to offer? And I think we had left off on talking about the one guy who knows where everything is for 35, 40 years in a cast somewhere in the emergency room. So back over to you.
Yeah, so that situation is important. Why is the guy that gets his leg injured become the most important person in the business all of a sudden, with everybody rushing into his hospital room to find out where the parts are or where do I get the parts? And the reason is that in the replenishment space, if it's as big as this thing, the most of that window is spent expediting. This is we're trying to get stuff in. It's using up almost all the resources. The sourcing part that's over here, which is hysterically important, is how much do I pay for it? How do I find a better quality? How do I find a more reliable supplier? But we're so busy expediting, we don't have time to do that. And so what we're trying to do is put the all that expediting electronically in a black box where there's that, those the flexibility of the two demand and supply things. So we never come together. The hands never clap, and they never pray for more inventory. And we were talking about, you asked me about this before and I didn't respond, but we're starting a new business in the commercial jet aviation space where there are $60 billion worth of aircraft currently grounded for all kinds of different reasons, but mostly because the repair of their engines is taking too long. So 10 months maybe to repair an engine. And, about every 10 days, they waste $1 million of profit for each plane. There's, 1,000 planes grounded. So this is an amazingly difficult situation that they're in. And so everybody's spending all their time trying to get that. And Boeing and Airbus, for example, are at the limits of their production capabilities, and they have 15-year backlogs. Well, that means that the solution is we don't even have an expensive solution, buying a new plane to this for 15 years, or it won't be fully solved for 15 years. And so all we're doing is looking at supply chains to try to decide where are supply chains causing damage and what can we do. So, this $60 billion a year problem, and by the way, 60 billion is more than all the airlines put together have ever made in a year. So the potential is enormous here. It would also lower prices for tickets for passengers, which would be pretty popular, and let the airlines make more money at the same time. They typically don't have that win-win. But as I say, if it's a $60 billion problem, well, what's the solution? Well, the solution is, 100, $200 million worth of inventory. And it solves a $60 billion problem. Holy moly. This is like, that's leverage, right? I decided I wanted to be in the business that owns that 100 to $200 million worth of inventory. And then we can feed it out so that an engine overhaul, instead of taking 10 months, it can get closer to a week. Literally, it's possible, if you had every part, to repair an engine in a week. So why does it take 10 months? It's crazy, particularly when every 10 days is $1 million lost. So it makes sense. But the problem is that you have to look at the whole supply chain. You can't just look at your part of the supply chain, because your part of the supply chain looks like I'm running around trying to find a high pressure turbine blade for my CFM56 engine. That's what your life looks like. And so it's hard to back out of your life and say, what should my life look like? And I think what SupplyStream does for people is allows them to see their life for the first time as it ought to be. And once they see that change, I think that's very difficult to ever beat them off of us. I mean, I think then it becomes a very sticky outsource relationship, because this outsource really makes a difference for me. And somebody
So,
may, insource it again, and then say, oh, that was a mistake. I got to go back.
So let's reemphasize that. Are you saying that about $200 million of pooled inventory could potentially solve a $50 billion problem for the
Yes.
airplane industry?
Yes.
Um, just walk me through that, maybe Jake or Henry, because this is obviously, if it's to your point, it's achievable today to get these, assuming that the manufacturers can manufacture it and they have the certifications, etc. Even with that in mind, like how is that possible today with what you're providing?
Yeah. So generally, what we do is we buy uh, older aircraft engines that someone's decided not to repair. So we're not relying on the manufacturers, and the manufacturers are under terrible burden because the CFM, for example, that's a Safran GE joint venture that makes the CFM 56 engine that I mentioned a second ago. They struggle because they're making new parts for the new LEAP engines, and they have the last generation engine, the CFM 56, which is getting a whole new lease of life because they can't make enough new engines. So they're having to produce parts for both of them, and the lifespan of that the previous generation engine has been just pushed out, at least a decade. They're going to run longer. Instead of 3 overhauls in their lifetime, they'll have 4 overhauls, much more expensive. But we can't get a new engine now. We have no choice but to use the old ones for longer, beat them into longer lives, service lives. So that's kind of the situation that the industry's under. So what we do is buy these used engines, tear them down for parts, and then send them out to different maintenance, repair, and overhaul MRO shops for repair. And then we get the parts back certified with a whole list of everything that's ever happened to them for their entire life to now, and provide that certification that FAA requires or IA requires internationally. And then now we've got a perfectly good part. It'll run for 5 or 10 years in an engine, and so we sell that part as an alternative to a new one. And that's on an engine overhaul. That's about a $2 million savings to use certified parts as opposed to new ones. Well, you doing thousands of engine overhauls per year, $2 million per engine is pretty significant.
And Jake, to that point, how do you get customers comfortable with these repaired parts? And I know in certain aircrafts you don't have a choice. It's just like the suppliers and the manufacturers don't exist anymore. But with this sort of business, how do you get customers saying, hey, look, if you can certify and test it and it's as good as the original part, and we can get it in 5-10 years out of this engine, and we're not going to be able to repair this engine for 15 years anyways because of the backlog. Is that really the selling point, or how do you convince like the bigger buyers of like these planes to say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense from an inventory perspective and just a cost efficiency perspective?
I'm gonna have to defer to Henry. The aviation stuff is still all in his bag until he brings me in otherwise.
I didn't know if I thought he probably knew enough to answer that question, but I was waiting to see what he said. That's why I was down here smiling.
Not me. Not yet.
But the answer is that they're already doing this. They're buying used parts and have been buying used parts for decades, for 50 years. So this is, used parts are a normal part of the supply chain for engine overhauls. When they're new, engines are brand new, you got to get new parts because there are no used ones yet. There's no worn out engines to tear down for parts. But when that happens, then the new parts go down and the used parts go up until it gets to be all the way the other way. And at this point, those engines are all retiring and nobody wants them anymore. And so the used parts then collapse in value. But that's kind of it's a 40-year cycle. You come up with a new engine, those engines, some of them will still run 40 years later. So it's a slow process to have the used parts become available and then become useless. So that's kind of the situation there. But Jake's deal is back on more generically, right? How do we do this generically? And that's what supply stream is. Supply stream is a mechanism where you don't run out of anything. You always have finished goods inventories to satisfy your customers today. No wait, presuming that it's not made to order, but auto made to stock, we call it made to availability. You make it so that it's available. That's the goal of a manufacturing process. And what we do, and with the other side of, we talked about feeding parts into a manufacturing plant. But if we have your finished goods inventory in our warehouse, instead of you telling us when we're getting more and more, product, finished goods product, we tell you when to make it. Now, it's a beautiful situation because you don't have to rely on your ERP system to guess what you should make or to make what's available. And so that, making what's available is how the plant stops from avoids shutting down entirely.
To your point, Jake, maybe a quick transition to you. So and you come from food supply chains. That was sort of your last industry, right? So as Henry's pointing out, this is a bit of a microcosm of the larger industry. But talk to me about how same ideas in supply stream that you're talking about in the automotive side and also the aerospace side apply on the food side, right? With everything going on right now, obviously with the outbreak, which was not caused by Taylor Farms, right? How would a system like supply stream respond to something like that, right? And answer or deliver more with the disruptions going on.
Yeah. Well, I'll speak to a bit of I actually had experience running a restaurant when I was first out of college. And an unfortunate part of that experience was we didn't order enough chicken. It's our chicken restaurant for 3 or 4 hours early because we didn't have enough chicken. That's like just devastating, right? And that's totally an inventory problem. And at every restaurant, at least ones that I'm familiar with when I've walked in the back of them, there's typically, again, one manager maybe will sub in, but they take a physical inventory to fill the truck order that's expected. And typically it's pretty regular, once, twice a week, right? Well, what's interesting about food service distribution is that they put a lot of the load on the restaurant themselves. Log back orders. If you ordered something and it doesn't show up, you realize that when it's not on your order. And so you have to, again, you're scrambling, you're expediting to go buy that extra 3 sacks of French fries from your alternative distributor, or they sent an alternative that you weren't expecting, things like that. And so the ramifications of inventory availability and having alternative suppliers is well understood in the food service space. But what's really interesting from my experience at Fresh Fry was we were a net new product. We were an innovative product. And getting broad availability product at the volumes at which distributors want to have in their space is really difficult. We're not moving pallets across in each DC across 70 DCs in a broadliner, right? And so we had to work through which allowed them to have these distributors have hub and spoke models. So they're already kind of inherently solving these issues, but the distributors are enforcing the customer really to pay for it at the end of the day. All the internal logistics, all those costs get passed on to the consumers of those restaurants. But where I see us participating in kind of an infrastructure like that is really to improve the flow of the products that are already in that system, to increase speed, especially when you think of offers that are shipping into those either into the central warehouse system or into the 70 some odd different DCs. There's probably a more consolidated option in which we could bring in more regular large truckloads or mixed truckloads from those suppliers and then disperse them through the model, through a hub and spoke model from like kind of a master distributor into those others. I see that being a very effective way to improve the flow of those products, especially in products that are so sensitive to expiring. Need those moving quickly. The longer they sit, the worse things get for the end user and how much waste is actually there. But the other thing that they do in the food service industry is they hold the manufacturers accountable too for on time and fulls, right? If you drop below a certain threshold, you're going to get billed for the profit that distributor and the sales that they should have gotten from your product. And so they're smart in that they're trying to figure it out. But they're putting band-aids on situations that I think proper product availability at the manufacturer level would really help ensure that sales going through the system for everybody. There's less penalty checks being written, and product is getting to the consumer. Actually, I would expect to be cheaper because of the way that logistics of the product could be consolidated through the system. We actually have an opportunity to work on something and I'm excited about what that looks like. So maybe in another year, I'll have very specific examples of what that looks like to tell you.
And to that note, Jake, how much waste do you think that a system like this would prevent as well, right? Because obviously there's the getting the stuff to the endpoint on time, but also to your point, food that expires along the way, that's a big problem just to handle, right, and get rid of. So a system like Supply Stream, do you have any estimates on what it would do from a waste reduction perspective or just good food availability perspective? I guess a different metric to look at it.
Well, at the restaurant level, folks want to be below percent, and a lot of managers are measured on that. But tell me how you measure me, I'll tell you how I behave. I don't want waste could create some not great behaviors of
That's right.
I'm just going to sell what I have, right?
Right.
But I do think that I'll quantify waste or qualify waste as additional expenses put into the system that are unnecessary, such as those expedites. I mean, you've seen in every city, there's the big tractor trailer goes to the restaurant, and then sometimes you pass that same restaurant and the hotshot van is in the same thing. There's additional expenses for what should have been on the truck in the first place, right? And I would imagine there's somewhere between 10 and 30% of costs that are bloated, wiped out entirely with more effective inventory planning and logistics.
Henry, would you tend to agree? That's the
Totally. And I can give you an example that from my experience back, 20 years ago, I was looking at Kroger, and Kroger has a $4 billion dairy business inside of that big company. I'm not saying the company $4 billion, it's far bigger than that, but there's a section inside of Kroger that's a $4 billion and they own their own dairies. They get delivery from the dairies 3 times a week. And yet, when I looked at 2% milk in gallons, their inventory was all over the place. It fluctuated so dramatically that at the end of the day, if there was this much inventory left, it was for sure going to run out before the next day at lunchtime when the dairy was going to deliver. And so it fluctuated all over the place. We used our Elucidate solution to help smooth that demand out, to take the variation out of it. And the consequence was, this is amazing because I didn't really expect this, but if here's you have a 10-day shelf life of a gallon of milk. And so here's 10 days and here's no days. When it got to no days, they threw the milk away. They were throwing away $4 million a year worth of milk. Just got past its expiration date, carried it out to the dumpster and dropped it in. Didn't recover it, didn't do anything. That was their process. What you saw was a variation of sort of days left in the milk before it expired, and the savvy shoppers would come in and look through the milk to try to find one that had more days, so they get one with higher utilization. So in other words, the customers reverse rotated the milk, so it was they made it sure that it was last in first out. When the store wanted it first in first out. What we did was we implemented Elucidate, and the range of days of remaining life shrunk up like this. It was just a tiny little narrow band. So it wasn't worth it to search through the bin to try to find a longer, milk with more days. They all had 8-9 days of shelf life on them. Hardly any 10-day shelf lives, but all the rest of them were about equal. And so that made for zero throwaways. It was a remarkable solution, and it's one of those things that if you I keep doing this kind of variation model. What we're doing by doing that is shock absorbing the variation. The variation's there. It's about to rain, run get some milk and bring it back in. It's going to snow, get a lot of milk. I don't know how long we're going to be stuck in the house. So there's surges of demand that they experienced. When I went to Kroger's center in Cincinnati, they've got a whole wall of TV screens, matched together with a picture of the whole United States, and it showed weather patterns going across the United States because they had to rush stuff into the stores that were about to be hit with a storm. So they understood that was a big deal for them, but didn't need to be a big deal once we implemented this because the problem just went away. And so you had the shelf life that you wanted on those products. You just stopped throwing stuff away. And so the justification is dramatic. I mean, the waste is just, the rework and the waste just go away. There's not that there's none. It's just not a big part of the business of your job anymore.
And to that point, Jake, just coming up on the hour. So, where do you see Supply Stream and your services going from here? Like, what are you guys targeting for the next 12 months? You already mentioned you're working with a customer on the food side that might have these numbers eventually. But where do you foresee, obviously, taking something that is clearly working in your backyard over in Louisville, but how do you see this expanding out to maybe nationwide or other industries, right? Because it's everybody has this problem: data centers, military. Food, cement, construction, electronics. I could name another 13 industries, right? That probably could use a solution like yours. But what is your, I guess, roadmap for the next 12 months?
Yeah. Luckily, and not to be selfish, but the infrastructure being invested in our own city, just in this region, in automotive, in appliance industry, there's a lot of CPG brands. People are coming to this area. They can get their product out to their customers 2 days for 75% of the United States from Louisville, Kentucky, or you can overnight pretty much anywhere in the United States from Louisville, Kentucky. And so we are not short of opportunities right here in our own backyard. We have the same conversation again a year from now. I think you'll be looking at a very transformed shipper solutions. I think we will be fighting in a different weight class in terms of the value we're bringing to the supply chain world. And I hope that we will have more opportunities to expand. And what that looks like could be as simple as, again, it starts with that 3PL inventory discipline and infrastructure. There's nothing that says that we can spin up franchises or other operating models out of folks that are already doing that foundational work in other regions that have similar, things like Memphis. I don't know how many of these are going to FedEx, but folks on the West Coast, certainly there's going to be a hotbed there, and then maybe in the upper Northeast. But Louisville is a great place to be, very strategic location for anybody who wants to get into moving products more effectively. And there are a lot of companies here that need the solution. So again, check back in a year, and I think I have some really interesting.
Thanks, Jake. And in the meanwhile, Henry, how does anyone get in touch with you to learn about your services? Is there a website? I know Jake and I talk on LinkedIn, but what's best to get in touch with you and try out your latest service?
Well, the one that really is more on target for this is neverrunout.com. And you'll see Jake's email on that you could get in touch with him, but neverrunout.com is pretty easy to remember. That's the idea, right? And so it talks about all the different parts of what we're doing here. Okay, there's a little video out there that explains it, but maybe the most middle of the page has little, kind of the infinity loop that people are stuck in, going back around. First, I try to do this, but then it goes wrong. So then I have to do that, and then it goes wrong. And so I have to do the first thing again, and that oscillation back and forth. And that's the hard part, right? Because big companies, there are a lot of people that have to say something, yes or no, to make a decision like this. But the part that I think that people might find useful, because decision making inside of more major companies is a teamwork thing. A lot of different people have to weigh in from their own points of view, and we have out there quite a few, maybe as many as 15, 16 different points of view where you're stuck in a loop. On the one hand, I have to do this in order to avoid a problem, but then it goes bad, it causes me to do the opposite thing, and then that goes bad and causes me to do the first thing again, and I oscillate back and forth. I have no choice but to do it. Reducing inventory, for example, or expediting, going back and forth between those two. So there are ones for the CFO, there's one for the president of the company, there's one for the owner of the company, there are 3 of them for the purchasing agents. So there are a number of different ones out there. The guy that's running the production floor, the guy that has to plan the production. All those people have their own points of view. And I think that's the thing that we really need to do if we're going to get this idea across and have other people buy in, is we have to talk to them in their own language. We can't talk to them in our language. If they wanted to learn our language, we wouldn't be necessary. So that's, I think, the kind of the where you might find it. Jake, you'll find Jake's email address out there on neverrunout.com, and I'm hcamp@ssco.pro if anybody wants to reach out to me. And I don't have any secrets. Anybody who wants to know something from me, ask me, I'll tell you. I'm working on an interesting one from a presentation I gave a couple of weeks ago, where companies making product for agriculture, for fertilization, and they take insects and they grow this product. And the problem is the product expires faster than it takes to make more. So they end up throwing away whatever doesn't sell right off the bat, and they have to make another batch and come back and do it again. It's a pretty good puzzle.
Yeah.
But it's not terribly different from the commercial aviation space, right? Where we've had expired products that are no longer useful. I bought a whole engine to get the hot products, but then I got a bunch of these other products, which nobody really wants that. I've got surplus of them already. Why did I want to buy another engine just to get the hot products? It'd be cheaper to buy brand new ones. So that we've been working on.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. Hopefully the audience was able to learn about SupplyStream. You're welcome to reach out to me as well if you want to be connected directly to Henry and Jake. And thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Ali.
Thank you. Great talking to you as always.